Hello, I'm Waqar Rizvi, and this is Scope. In the first segment of today's show, we're going to discuss Syria. Now, a senior advisor to Bashar al-Assad, the president, has said that the country plans to file a lawsuit against the United States. This specifically for, quote-unquote, plundering the country's oil resources. Waqar Rizvi has said that the U.S. has no right to that oil in the Arab country and is therefore seeking to sue the country for, of course, as we know, Donald Trump's announcement not too long ago where he had said there would be U.S. troops to be, quote unquote, protecting the Syrian oil installations, especially in the north of the country. On top of that, there's also been a missile attack in Syria as well, which has allegedly targeted pro-Iran fighters. That's according to a monitor that follows activities in Syria closely. There's even talk possibly of drones of an undetermined origin being suspected of being responsible for those attacks and those raids on the headquarters of Syria's 47th Brigade. What are the implications of that? Because it's certainly not the first time that Iranian interests would come under attack in Syria. We've, of course, had such attacks in the past, especially carried out by Israel. Let's discuss all of that a bit further. We're joined now by Hadi Wahhab, who is a PhD candidate in Middle Eastern politics at the University of Exeter. He is currently traveling, but is usually based in Exeter in the UK itself. John V. Bowlus is also joining us. He's joining us from Istanbul in Turkey. He's the editor-in-chief of Energy Reporters. John and Hadi, thank you both for your time today. Hadi, let me start with you. Let's start firstly by talking about this lawsuit. Do you think that there are grounds for the Damascus government to in fact sue the United States for, as Bouthena Shaban has there said, plundering the oil resources of the country?
I don't think there's ground for that, because it's just like a reprisal, political reprisal, if we can say. But there's no ground for that because there's nothing to do. I think it's bigger than that. I guess Trump is gonna withdraw after the presidential elections in the U.S. So until then, there's nothing really happening. It's just like it's a biting game between all players, but there's nothing to happen there. So if they protested against that, or like what Bouthena Shaban said, it's gonna lead nowhere. It's just rhetoric, and the U.S. troops are present there, and they're not going to leave now.
But I guess the point, Hadi, for the Damascus government would be, listen, these are our natural resources. This is our oil, which we should be getting the earnings from. So on that point, do you agree with them?
Yeah, of course, it's theirs. And since the beginning, President Assad, and even later backed by Russia and Putin, they said that Syria's land should always stay like this, and all foreign countries and foreign troops should leave. The same thing vis-a-vis Turkey's troops. So at the end, they're gonna leave, and even the oil is gonna come back. Maybe the Russians will give profits to the United States somewhere else, but Assad had always said that Syria will stay united, and these are Syrian oil, and it's clear that this is what's gonna happen. Maybe they will do something vis-a-vis the Kurds. They will give them some benefits to protect them, but that's all of it. Syria is for the Russians, and that's clear.
Of course. So, John, what are your thoughts on this? Is there merit in saying, listen, these are our natural resources, you don't have a right to them?
Well, of course. I mean, they're within their, territorial boundaries, or what the boundaries that were drawn up after the First World War. And, of course, they have a valid stance to that. That's indisputable. I have to, kind of. Obviously, there's a huge history of these resources in this area. When we talk about, again, I reference World War I, kind of all these historical claims there. The Turkish entry into Syria has been steady. I think that's the one country that would actually be most interested in these resources. And that's something that we should monitor. I don't know if you want to get more into kind of Trump's, reasons for this. I mean, I think he says one thing rhetorically, of course, and that's 80% directed to his base. He's just constantly trying to say things that appeal to his base, and taking the oil would constitute an actual war crime. So there's no actually a legal basis to this. So he says it makes his base happy. It conjures up, a lot of Americans were very unhappy, of course, with the Iraq invasion in 2003. Yeah. That resulted in no oil, actually, in the southern part of the country. American companies did enter, in Iraqi Kurdistan in the 2010s. But, I think Americans kind of like that frankness of, we're actually there for something, so at least let's get the oil. So I think that's kind of what's motivating him, and maybe the other 20% is just kind of his inanity, inability to kind of deal with reality and just kind of say whatever he wants. So I think Syria has a legal basis for making this claim.
I mean, this doesn't help the American image, does it, though, John, in the region? As you well pointed out, of course, with the Iraq war, till today, there'll be many people who will say it was all about oil, right? So this sort of just furthers that argument, as you alluded to in your first answer. I mean, Donald Trump is not doing any favors for his country in a foreign policy sense, is he, through this stance?
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't think the world views it very favorably. Again, what he does is for his, America First agenda. It speaks to his base. Certainly it does not. It's not good for their image. Although I'll say, on some level, it must be somewhat relieving and kind of nice to see an American president be so kind of honest about interests on the ground. And we don't have that kind of honesty ever before. I'm no Trump apologist, but I think there's something kind of, refreshing is the word, I guess I was looking for that.
All right, so then, Hadi, one could argue, obviously, as you well know, as well, Hadi, that that Syria right now is obviously going through a situation of major instability and has gone through major instability over these past years. There's a lot of question marks about the legitimacy of Bashar al-Assad's rule, all of the above in context. Then many would argue, listen, can he even be trusted with these oil resources? What would he do with the earnings? Would he just continue to, quote unquote, attack his own people, for example, if he were to earn more money through oil?
I guess it depends on everyone's political stances in this matter, because if someone is anti-Assad, he's going to say that. If he's not, he's going to say Assad is Syria's president. And he has the right, as a regime, not a person. They have the right to do with the oil whatever they think is best for their people. So, and they would say that the United States and all foreign countries that intervened in Syria, they're interfering in the sovereignty of a country, which Assad didn't call. So I guess you can take other examples to look how it depends on everyone's political stances. Let's say in Libya, you have many examples. In Libya, the United States came to Iraq, and the aftermath was chaos. So they can't come and say that Assad, they want to implement their agenda on Assad. And I guess it's more than that, because Russia, I'm going to give you a small example very quickly. We were talking like 2-3 months, not even before that. In the UK, there was a conference, and one of the students said that we guess that the UK's foreign office will be interested in Syria. And the professor who was talking, he looked at him, he said, no, Syria is for the Russians. And he kept going, like it's like nothing. So we all know that Syria is for the Russians, and they're going to deal with the United States. I don't know how the deal will end after, but on the regional level, they're going to have to speak with the Iranians and the Turkish, the Russians. On the international scenes, I guess, and the United States, if you've read the back channel for William Burns, it was out in 2019, he said that in Obama's term, we were planning to withdraw from the Middle East, kind of withdraw. But the Arab uprisings pushed us to stay there. And I guess that it's true that Trump is the most honest U.S. president that came now. And he said that we're going to withdraw, but with benefits, of course. And it's all about oil now.
So then, John, one gets the feeling that few of these external players are actually thinking about Syrians themselves, right? Those who are stuck in the middle of all of this and have been stuck in the middle of this entire war situation in their country for so long, and many of course, have had to leave. Do you think this is essentially just then a battle between superpowers and other powers, including Russia and the U.S., possibly over resources within Syria, or just influence?
I'd say it's for the latter more. I mean, I really don't think Syria's resources are worth overstating. They're minimally. I think before the war, I think they were about 500,000 barrels a day. That's less. That's about 0.5% of global production. They're not there for oil. There was a lot of talk that the Syrian war broke out because of competing gas pipelines through it. Again, I don't think it's about gas or oil. These are just where these few paltry resources, I'd say, are located. And they're just there. And it's just kind of a convenient rhetorical way for Trump to, I should add, it was in the wake, of course, of his withdrawal, right, from northern Syria. They pulled back to these fields and, to the east. So, I do think there is a general will to kind of get out by the United States. The United States always pulls out from almost everywhere it goes, except for maybe Japan and Germany, we can say. And, they're pulling out, and that will continue. And Trump wants to pull out. He knows foreign wars, especially in the Middle East, are not unpopular at home.
All right, so Hadi, talking about external players, I wanted to then talk about this missile attack that's taking place in Syria, allegedly, of course, on pro-Iran fighters. Possibly even drones were used in this attack. Not the first time, certainly, that Iran has been attacked, or Iranian interests, I should say, have been attacked within Syria. Why these continuing attacks on Iran? Is it sort of something that even the Russians possibly just turn a blind eye to and allow to happen, because they're also sort of in a tug of war with the Iranians as well for influence in the country, aren't they?
You asked the question that I was thinking to answer.
Okay.
Because, they're turning a blind eye. It's obviously the bombing stopped for a while. Then it continued after a meeting in Israel between the Americans, the Russians, and the Israelis. So definitely they're turning a blind eye for that, because the Israelis are more concerned with Iranians there and Hezbollah. And Deir ez-Zor is very important. We have to pay attention for this. Deir ez-Zor, when Deir ez-Zor was in the hands of ISIS, everyone was fighting, and it was like a race who's going to reach Deir ez-Zor and Al-Bukmal first, because for Hezbollah and Iran and the Syrians, they were interested for linking Beirut to Tehran through Syria and Iraq by Al-Bukmal. And I remember very well when, for the first time, although usually Hezbollah fighters never appear before cameras, a Hezbollah commander appeared there, and he said a speech. He spoke it, and he said, "We're fighting as an axis there." And it was a clear message for everyone that they reached this far. And rumors said, I don't know if it's true, I guess it's a fact, that Al-Bukmal is in the hands of the Iranians. So Syria mainly is the bridge that filled the gap between Lebanon and Iran, and that predates the Syrian war. And I guess it's going to keep on like that. So the Israelis are going to hit the Iranian bases and Hezbollah, because there's an also very important point here that Israel is very concerned with the missiles that Hezbollah now has, the precision missiles. They have like 450 missiles. And I guess they're trying to push with the Americans to disarm Hezbollah from these weapons. So I don't know where this would reach, but I don't think now it's going to stop. They're going to keep hitting.
Okay, so let me get a final comment from John before you both go. John, on this issue of Iran within Syria, that seems to be one area, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, where the Russians and the Americans and the Israelis, as Hadi there spoke about in his answer, agree upon that they sort of want Iran's influence sidelined to the extent possible. Do you think that the Iranians would walk away that easily? I mean, they do have influence within Damascus, or do you think it's sort of overstated, possibly, when we're talking versus the Russian influence, for example?
Well, that's a complicated question. I mean, I agree with the way you framed it, and I agree with Hadi's description. Iran helped birth Hezbollah and kind of making that whole connection, that link to Tehran, is a long-term strategy. I don't see them giving up that. Hezbollah came to Assad's rescue earlier in the war. I think this is a long-term fight. I do very much, though, believe that there's, and I saw this kind of coming with Trump's election, but just, it made sense too at the timing of the war. They're going to be kind of U.S.-Russian bargaining, maybe not a grand bargain at one moment, but, there are clearly being deals made between those two powers to kind of de-escalate the situation at some point, and Iran will, to some extent be sidelined by that.
Very well. We'll leave it there at that with John and, but of course we appreciate both of your time and insight. Viewers, we're going to be back though, speaking about this very topic after this break. Do stay tuned with us. Viewers, we're back here in Scope with me, Waqar Rizvi. We're continuing to discuss the situation in Syria, and we're going to add two new voices to this conversation. We're joined now by Andreea, Stoian, Karadeli, who is an independent researcher, security and terrorism analyst, and she's joining us now from Istanbul in Turkey. Also joining us is Yahya Aridi, who is a Syrian opposition member. He's joining us now from Strasbourg. Yahya and Andreea, thank you both for your time today. Yahya, I'd like to start with you, if I may, and I'd like to start firstly by talking about this missile attack in Deir ez-Zor on allegedly pro-Iran fighters. What do you make of these sorts of attacks that have occurred on Iranian interests? It's certainly not the first time.
Good evening. Well, the key word here is Iranian interests. Now, what is Iran doing in Syria in the first place? Iran's interests are in Iran, not in Syria. We're using militias to help the dictatorship to kill Syrian people. And Israel needs an excuse to just get Iran out of Syria. Not because it wants to get it out of Syria, but because it wants to mess up with the situation more than it is already messed up in Syria. So this is a continuous process on the part of the Israeli jets targeting Iran, and the whole world is trying to get Iran out of Syria. No interests for Iran in Syria except ideological ones. They are trying to promote their chaotic ideological project and contribute to demographic cleansing, ethnic cleansing, demographic change in Syria, in order to keep or to support this dictatorship, this oppressive regime, to continue in power, which is against the will of Syrian people, using or taking advantage of the horrible situation Syrians are in now. So, and they are providing the excuse for this chaos and for the Israeli expansionist policies and their aggressive nature. So,
but then, to be fair, Yahya, if I may come in for a moment, would you say that if Iran was not involved at all in Syria, that Israel would not be attacking it in any way, shape, or form? Because it's not like the Israelis and the Syrians have ever gotten along, really.
Well, that's the Syria and Israeli conflict is a different story. Israel occupies the Syrian Golan Heights in 1967, and it tried to pass its laws and jurisdiction on that part of Syria. It is a Syrian land, but the statement that you made, if Iran were not in Syria, Israel would not target it. Of course, it would not. If it wants to target it, let it go to Iran and target Iran. At a certain time in the 90s, it targeted the Iraqi nuclear program, Israel. Now, Iran came into Syria in 2011 and tried to help the aggressive regime using Hezbollah militias.
Very well. Let me ask Andreea then about that. Andreea, what are your thoughts on these ongoing attacks on, as I'd put it to Yahya, Iranian interests? Certainly not the first time. Is it as simple as Yahya has mentioned there, that if Iran were not there, then of course it's not like those Iranian interests would be attacked within Syria. But then I wonder if the Israelis would not still in some form be involved in Syria, nevertheless, considering the Golan Heights, considering Israel would have an interest in how things work out in Syria, certainly.
Of course, they would be involved. Actually, in the past years, unfortunately, we have witnessed Syria as a multilateral chess game with several countries that have much interest in the region. And when it comes to Iran, we have to understand, and I was actually calling it in an article a few months ago, the relation between Iran and Syria. We can divide it into a marriage of convenience or an axis of resistance. So, of course, Iran has interest in Syria. Of course, Iran has seen Syria as a buffer zone in its own war against Israel. And otherwise, if Iran was not present in Syria, which cannot be possible, would have never be possible, Israel would still have its own interest in the region, and we still have its own part, would play its own part in the conflict, undetermined by the Iran's presence. But right now we have both in the region, both fighting each other in a different way through Syria as a buffer zone.
So what do you make of the argument, which I imagine at some level is quite legitimate, that the involvement in Syria, it shouldn't have as much influence as it does in Syria. And that argument certainly can be made for all of these external players in Syria, every one of them. Shouldn't they all essentially be the ones walking away and letting Syrians be the outsider within the country deciding what is best for their country and preserving their sovereignty?
I honestly believe that this should be the case. Syrians should be left to decide what they would do and what they have to do next within their own territory. But that's the ideal solution. That's the ideal resolution of the problem. However, we have witnessed in the past years, and not just in the recent times, the fact that the countries in the Middle East have never been left alone solving their own issues. Otherwise, if it was Iran or any other external power that got involved in the region. So, although maybe the best solution by now, and I do remember a conference that I participated in 2016, when a Syrian representative in Romania, a Syrian official in the Syrian embassy in Romania, was declaring that, if you want to see Syria in its best form, the best thing to do is to leave us alone. We can rebuild it ourselves. That's what he was claiming. So maybe the best thing is for Syria is to be rebuilding itself and deciding on regarding its own territory on its own. But within Syria, we have Syrians in the government, with the government, and Syrians in the opposition against the government. So who are going to be the ones to decide upon the territory? That's another side of the story as well. So it's much more complex than we like. Even if we say Syrians, we have to understand that they're very, very different factions within their own country.
All right, so then Yahya, if we're talking Syrian sovereignty, then I want to go to the other topic of the discussion, and that, of course, about Syrian oil and Syria's natural resources. As you know, Bethena Shaban has said that the Damascus government may sue the United States for its control right now over some oil installations. Everyone, of course, would argue that these are not huge oil installations, not like the Americans are going to, be making a lot of money necessarily off of this oil. But the argument is still legitimate, is it not? Whether you agree with the Assad government or not, that this is and this should be within Syrians' control at the very least.
Well, let me just go back to what the lady has just said, which is a very important matter regarding the opposition and the government. Now, there are certain UN Security Council resolutions that call for a peace settlement between the revolution, between those who are opposing the regime and the regime itself. And there were calls for talks in Geneva, but every time, with the instigation of Iran, the regime is trying to block these talks. They talk about peace, but at the same time, what they do is war against the people. So Syrian people can decide their destiny by themselves if these resolutions are fulfilled, and if the government is not that stubborn and obstructions or blocking the talks do not happen. Now, back to the threat made by Bouteflika Shaban against the United States controlling the oil fields in northeastern Syria. Well, this is like a joke, when you threaten the United States. Of course, the United States does not have the right to control anybody's oil. And they don't have right to be there. But there are political strings attached to that fact. This oil is being used by the regime in order to empower itself more, in order to crush the people. And this is one thing. Another thing, for some time, the United States had relations with the Kurds in the northeastern part of Syria. And they do not want to let the regime have control over that. Because of that, that statement was made by the political advisor to the presidency, Bouteflika Shaban. It sounds really ridiculous, but at the same time, when there is a peace settlement, definitely all the people of Syria would say we do not have any foreign troops on our soil.
I wonder, though, Yahya, if you allow me, as somebody who is part of the opposition at this time, that's what we would label who you're a member of. I wonder, do you not think at some level that having all of these external players in your country is worse than the disagreements that you may have with the Assad government, which of course are huge, certainly, and I'm not downplaying that, but wouldn't it be better to fight it out with Assad directly instead of having all of these external players on either side? Isn't that more of a priority, to have the country not have all these players' hands in the nation, and to have the nation then fight it out, figure it out on their own, really, amongst themselves as Syrians?
Absolutely, but this is again the idealist situation. The regime, from the very beginning, when people rose against it, it's called the Hezbollah militias, then the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, and in 2015 it even called the Russian power in order to bombard villages, hospitals, schools, and for Putin to try over 300 kinds of weapons, and they are bragging about it, the Russians. We have tried over 300 kinds of weapons, and they were very successful. This is very shameful. Now, if it were left to the Syrian people and the regime, things would have been solved from the very beginning. But the regime was so stubborn. It came up with the motto, with a saying that either I rule it or I ruin it. That was really the tragedy. That was the origin or the basis of the tragedy. Calling foreign powers was because of the regime itself. Then everybody found that this is a land where everybody can interfere.
Okay, so let me ask Andreea. Andreea, what are your thoughts on that? Because this issue over the oil, I don't know, to me, as somebody who's looking from the outside, and I would think that it's quite important to make that point, at least. And yes, of course, the U.S. is a hugely powerful country, all of the above, and there's probably a lot going against such a lawsuit, if there were to be one, to be such a lawsuit filed in an international court. But I imagine it's important to make the point that, listen, these are our resources. You don't have a right to siphon them off, even if there are not that many.
Exactly. I do agree with you. Unfortunately, we have a very misuse of words, I think, from the U.S. side. A few months ago, President Donald Trump said that we secured the oil. The U.S. has secured the oil in Syria, without providing any explanation regarding what is actually meant by this sentence. Then if we dissect a little bit the words of Bouteflika Shaban, who, by the way, is, yes, she's a senior political advisor. She's also the media advisor to President Assad since 2008. So she has been long in business, if I can say it like this. She said that there is a possibility. So first of all, we don't discuss a certainty, we discuss a possibility. Those are very strong allegations, right? But if they in case they decide to proceed with them, they would need very important, strong proof to come up with. then we need to understand that this is a message that is being sent. Now, from whom is the message and to whom is it being delivered to? First of all, yes, is the speaker for the Syrian government, but the interview is to a Iranian news agency, right? To Fars news agency. So again, we come back a little bit to the same circle of interest and to same countries, one of them being Iran. So it's a message from not just from the Syrian government, but also from forces that stand behind the Syrian government. So again, are we actually talking about the Syrian authority or the Syrian legacy over its own territory? I don't really think so. Then to whom are we talking with? Because if it's a message just to the US, it would stand by just saying this sentence up to, they steal the Syrian oil. Of course, again, I would like to underline the fact that these are very strong allegations. And it's very important I'm sure the US is going to come up and say, you have to come up with proof when stating that. Or at least they should do this. Then it's actually the fact that the message went on saying that we are against all the forces that occupy against our will our territory. So it's not directed just to the US, but to other countries that are involved in the Syrian territory in Syria and are not preferred by the Syrian government, because that's all we talk about. It's not authority, it's not legacy, it's not sovereignty that we talk about. It's about the forces that are preferred by the Syrian government or not. Those have actually the legacy to be in the country or not be in the country. So if we dissect the message, that's what I would actually get out of it.
Okay, we'll have to leave that as a final word. I know there's, of course, a lot more ground in this regard, but we've tried to give viewers both sides of this issue, certainly, and I appreciate both Yahya and Andreea for their time today and for sharing their insight with us. Viewers, we earlier spoke as well to Hadi and John, also about both of these issues, this possible lawsuit, and again, at this time, it's just a possibility. It may not even happen, that Buthaina Shaban, the senior advisor to President Assad, has spoken about suing the U.S. because of its control right now of oil installations, as Donald Trump had announced not too long ago, even though he had said he actually wanted to leave Syria. And then, of course, this missile attack in Deir ez-Zor on Iranian interests, Iran essentially at this time controlling the Al-Bu Kamal area. The Israelis, the Russians, everyone's already unhappy with Iran's involvement seemingly in the country. Can Iran simply just be kicked out, though? I don't think it's as simple as that. Certainly, I don't think any of these players believe so either, but nevertheless, they'll do their part in trying to make Iranians' lives as hard as possible. Also, what of Syrian sovereignty in all of this, though? That's the major issue, and that's what we've discussed with a lot of the guests, that Syrian sovereignty at some level should be paramount, should it not? And for Syrians then to be able to resolve their very major differences, certainly. No one's downplaying that, but those major differences need to be resolved among Syrians themselves, not with all of these external players continually involved in the country, possibly even siphoning off a lot of its natural resources, however little those resources may be. We'll leave it there for now, though, for this segment. I'll be back, though, with my next segment after this break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, viewers. You're still here in Scope with me, Waqar Rizvi. In this segment of today's show, we're going to discuss Lebanon. The political crisis in that country continues. As we know, there have been those protests that have been long-standing now, especially considering Lebanon is going through a significant economic crisis. Also, we've had Saad Hariri resign as prime minister not too long ago, and now there is talk of Hassan Diab being able to, or trying to at least, form a new government. The protesters on the streets are not happy about this new appointment, saying that this will not succeed. This is not what they wanted. They want a complete change and complete overhaul of the system. How really realistic is that demand as well, and will this really help the country's economic situation in any regard? There have been clashes outside the central bank not too long ago, and now there's this movement of Lebanese talking about not paying their taxes as a form of protest as well. Will that work? Will that force the Lebanese establishment's hands in favor of what the protesters and demonstrators want? Let's discuss that further. We're joined now by Jamal, Wakim, who is a professor of history and international relations at Lebanese University. He's joining us now from Beirut. Jamal, as always, we appreciate your time. Now, what do you make of what's happened as far as Hassan Diab? Will he be able to, do you think, succeed where Hariri and others failed?
Well, I believe that the choice of Hassan Diab, who Hassan Diab was to fill in the vacuum left by the decision of Saad Hariri not to form the new cabinet in the beginning. And I believe that Dr. Diab is facing a lot of problems, especially in choosing the Sunni ministers for his cabinet. Even if they were technocrats, they are pressured by the pro-Hariri and by the Sunni Mufti not to accept the nomination to be ministers. In this case, this will block the possibility of forming a new government, because we know that according to the Lebanese sectarian formula, there should be an equitable representation of all major confessions in the government and in the parliament, of course. And I believe that these things will escalate, especially with the decision of Saad Hariri to obstruct the formation of a new cabinet if he's not the one to form it. So we need to wait and see after the New Year's Eve, because everybody is waiting an escalation in the tension in the street.
Okay, so then let's talk then about the tensions in the streets, because there is, as you well know now, there's this movement of "we won't pay," as the Twitter account is called. It was opened, I believe, 2 weeks ago, and there's now support for that movement where Lebanese are saying we won't pay our taxes. Will that work?
Well, there is a call for this, and I believe that it could give or get a lot of support from Lebanese people who are facing economic hardship so far. So, but this would render the economic situation even worse, especially with the fact that the Lebanese society or Lebanese economy have shifted from a productive economy in 1992 towards a rentier economy that is mainly based on financial speculations and on the banking sector, which dominates the economic system in Lebanon. So with the failure of the banking sector and with the failure of the state, and if this goes on, I believe that this will worsen the situation, and it will drive the demonstrations even farther. We need to admit the fact that not all demonstrators are from one faction or have a unified agenda. But now with the decision of Saad Hariri to join the opposition and to join the street, this will give momentum to the street, and it will even cause more problems to the President of the Republic.
Okay, let's add another voice to this conversation. We're now Mohammed Saleh Alftayeh, who is a senior researcher at the Futuristic Studies Institute. He's currently joining us from London. Mohammed, we appreciate your time today. What are your thoughts, Mohammed, firstly, on Hassan Diab? Will he be able to succeed where Hariri failed, seemingly? And secondly, what do you make of this movement of Lebanese now saying that they would not pay their taxes?
First of all, for the prospect of Hassan Diab forming the new government, I don't think he is going to fulfill his promise of forming a government within 6 weeks, as he promised. It's very unlikely that he can do that. This is based on the historical experience of Lebanon. I mean, even Saad al-Hariri, when he formed his current government, he took about 8 months to form it, even though all political parties participated in that government. It was very difficult, to allocate parts of the government to each party. So it was very difficult to form that government. It took him 8 months, from May 2018 till the end of January 2019. Even before that, the previous time when he formed the government, it took him about 2 months. Before that, even Tamam Salam in 2013, it took him even about 9 months.
Yeah.
So, historically speaking, in Lebanon, it's very difficult to form government. You have to give each party their share of the government. And now this is for the first time they are going to form a government that's going to be mixed between politicians on one side and, technocrats on the other hand. This is the first in the experience of Lebanon. So I don't think that's going to succeed quickly. This is the first thing. The other thing, talk about... what was your second question?
It was about the taxes. There's this movement now of Lebanese saying that we won't pay our taxes. That seemingly a new form of protest now.
Now, this is another factor that it's going to increase the difficulties of the Hassandia forming government. Lebanon, government of Lebanon, every year they have a deficit in their budget of about 30%. Now, for the current protest has been going on for almost more than 2 months now, and I think it was the finance minister who said that during the weeks of the protest, the government lost revenue for about 50%, which led to an increase on their deficit. So this complicates the task of Hassandia. So the first question is how he's going to handle the situation and give each party their share of the government. The second question will be how he's going to form the budget. Now, with this revenues, that means there's going to be more deficit, which will make it even harder for him to meet the demands of the Paris conference in 2018. In 2018, there was a conference in April 2018 in Paris, France, and there were many parties, Europeans and the United States, and even some Arab countries. And they promised the government of Lebanon that they are going to give them about more than $11 billion, but that was provided with certain conditions. One of them is that the government of Lebanon has to reduce the deficit to about 8% in their budget, but now they are running about 30%. So it's a huge gap between the current situation and what they have to do in order to receive more, financial help.
Okay, so Jamal, let me bring you back in. When we're talking about the governance system in Lebanon, this sectarian quota system, if we may call it that, many protesters say that very system is the entire problem. That is why there is all this corruption, because each of these respective parties, be they of any sect, sort of because they have this quota in place, they can sort of just take advantage of the situation, and they do. Do you think that system should be dismantled? Is it even possible to do that?
Yeah, first, I believe that this system is the problem. So the problem is structural in Lebanon. However, too bad, I don't believe that the system could be changed overnight. It needs a long process because the system has been in elaboration for the past 2 centuries. So, and it's also the political structure that manages a rentier economy to the favor of a certain mercantile class that have dominated the economic life in Lebanon for the past 2 centuries. So it's not possible to change the system overnight. It will take too long, especially that the demonstrators, not all of them agree on changing the whole system. So we have a majority of people, unorganized people, who are calling for a change in the system. However, we have the organized part, which belong to parties who were formerly in the government, like the Lebanese forces, the PSP, the Future Movement. They are not, or they don't agree on changing the system. There are also minor chieftains in Lebanon who wouldn't be willing, who are part of the demonstrations, but who wouldn't go along with changing the whole system.
Just because we're running out of time, Jamal, I'm going to interrupt you. I apologize. I just wanted to, if you allow me, I just want to give the last 30 seconds, if you allow me, to give to Mohammed. Mohammed, just very quickly tell us, do you agree the entire system needs to be changed? Is that even possible?
I disagree that the entire system in Lebanon can be changed. Now, because there is this crisis, it means that each political party is going to oppose that change because, especially now because this government is going to be, unlike previous government, it will be formed by only half of the political parties in Lebanon, what's called the 8th of March movement. So they are going to be met with extreme opposition from other parties on one hand, who also happen to be in control of the economy. They have control over the importing, things like petroleum derivatives, wheat, foodstuff, everything. Even they are in control of the financial sector. So if you are going to form the government, I'm talking about Alftayeh, if he's going to form the government and he wants to make some changes just to control the crisis that's going on, he will be met with opposition from those people because he needs to make changes. He will be just like a doctor who needs to make very drastic decision about, removing one organ of the body. Now, this is going to be very difficult because of the situation in Lebanon has been going on like this for at least 30 years since the end of the Civil War.
Okay, Mohammed, I do apologize. I'm going to have to cut you off. I will try to continue this discussion properly at a later date with both of you. But we sincerely, of course, appreciate both of your time and, of course, your insight. It's really important, isn't it, viewers, to discuss the situation in Lebanon, because it is very tough when we talk about the system that is in place, the sectarian quota system. And just yesterday, we were talking about the system in Iraq as well. And though the systems are similar, there are, of course, some major differences as well. Iraq has been able to bring in that election law. Lebanon is very much still struggling to figure out how, if at all, it can really start making changes to the system that is currently in place and that has been in place for such a long time and has seemingly maintained the peace between all of these different sects of society, different faiths, living in a united Lebanon. Will this work? Can Hassan Diab be the person to unite all these people? He's still technically just from one sect. Will he be able to get the Sunnis on board, as Jamal there had said would be a challenge for him? Will he even be able to form the government as quickly as he said, 6 weeks? I mean, it took Aridi 8 months at least to form a government, and that too didn't work out very successfully for him. And then there's this huge issue of the finances of the country. You can't keep running budget deficits which are larger and larger and larger on a yearly basis and expect to survive, happily as a country. That will certainly come back to bite you, and especially at a time now where protesters are talking about not even paying their taxes. A lot of challenges ahead, certainly, for Lebanon, which we'll keep an eye on, of course, here in Scope. I'll leave it there for now, though. I've been Waqar Rizvi. Thanks for watching.